Welcome and thanks for pressing play. This episode of WarDocs was made possible by a partnership with the Defense Strategies Institute's OpMed TV and was recorded at the 2024 Operational Medicine Symposium in San Antonio. These interviews focus on optimizing military medicine through the modernization and implementation of policies, education, training, research, and development. We also explore emerging technologies to enhance the health, strength, and survivability of warfighters. Welcome to this episode of WarDocs in connection with OpMed TV. We're currently here with Major General Tom Harrell. He wears multiple hats, and I wrote them all down so I didn't forget. He's the commander of the 59th Medical Wing. He is the San Antonio Market Director, which is in partnership with that command of the 59th Medical Wing in San Antonio. He also has a Network Central director job with the Defense Health Agency, and he will soon take command of an organization called AFMED Alpha, and he'll explain a little bit about that concept in a minute. So,
right on.
Sir, thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
So I got a chance to watch your plenary conversation this morning, and what you said was you're here to start a conversation. What is the conversation that you want to get started about operational medicine?
Right on. Well, I guess more accurately, the conversation is already going.
Right.
So I guess I would more appropriately say continue the conversation that has started. But we're facing an entirely different way of doing things now than we have experienced as a military healthcare system. When we look at peer competition and the environment that we're in now, we have to think differently. I alluded to the fact that we are at an inflection point in history. Those come along about every 30 to 50 years, depending upon who you talk to. And it involves a fundamental change of how we approach the problem sets that face us. And so the conversation I want to have is, what does peer competition mean for the military medical service? What is it that we have to do differently? We are extraordinarily good at what we do, but we've been good at that for the last 30 years. And what we are facing is completely different. So the conversation has to be not what we've done, but what do we have to do? The conversation has to be what doctrines change instead of holding to them, because we're all used to holding on to where we're comfortable. But we have to be uncomfortable and we have to let go and think differently. If we don't think differently, we are not going to succeed in a peer competition. Now I say that, but I speak out of both sides of my mouth, because in some respects, it's back to the future. In our country, 30 years ago when I joined the Air Force, we had a clear adversary. It was the Soviet Union. And so we acted and behaved based on large-scale combat operations and how that would work with a clear adversary. We haven't done that for the last 30 years. We faced violent extremist organizations. We faced smaller nation states. We have not faced peer competitors. And so while we have to think differently, we should never discard the lessons of the past, right? We have to be informed by history.
Well, it's funny you say that, because one of my favorite quotes is from Aldous Huxley, who says, and I'll paraphrase here, one of the biggest lessons of history is that man doesn't learn the lessons of history. And you're right, we are going back more than a couple decades. We're going back to World War II to have that kind of amount of casualties expected, deaths on the battlefield, that sort of moral injury. We may see a little bit of what's going on in Ukraine and learn some stuff there, but where are you focused to bring some of that stuff for that great peer conflict? How do we get ready for that, and how do we change that mindset from what we experience in OIF and OEF?
Right, I think it's important you bring up OIF and OEF. We did phenomenal, right? Everyone is aware of the 98% plus survival rate. The difference in what we were facing with peer competition is in fact what we experienced the last time as a nation in World War II. And the change there is that while we do specialize as medics, and that's important, we need to bring those specialized skills into the battlefield. The way of engaging in peer competition when we're looking at large numbers of casualties potentially is creating what in the Air Force we call the multi-capable airman, a mission-ready airman. And that is diversifying. And so in the Air Force over the last 30 years, to do our job and do it well, we've highly specialized. In a peer competition, if we get into large-scale combat operations, the teams are going to be much smaller. They're going to have to be multi-capable. So while I am an internist and a cardiologist, and I'm focused on that aspect of the human body, I need to be a generalist again. I need to be able to know what's sitting in front of me and how to at least begin the care. From a medical technician perspective, it means that if you are a medical technician who doesn't routinely engage in patient care, we need to up that game. We need to give you fundamental skills that because you are a medic, you can deliver some fundamental care. Now, we start that in TCCC, but the Air Force has gone further in our program Medic X, where we have 52 skills that we are training all of our medics, regardless of what their underlying specialty is, regardless of whether they lay hands on patients on a regular basis, so they can provide that fundamental care. And more than that, free up those that do engage in patient care to focus on the more complicated issues. So that's been a huge shift. As we compare back to World War II, that's what your corpsman was doing.
Right.
Okay? And we've got to now adopt that mindset and move away from that highly specialized way of thinking that I can't do anything else. This is my job and I'm framed in a box.
So it's interesting that you say that because, right now medicine has become more and more and more subspecialized. In urology, you've got oncology, you've got infertility, you've got all kinds of specialties. And wearing the DHA hat, you want that direct care system to be the best medical care possible and cover everything. You're a cardiologist, and so electrophysiology, advanced endovascular techniques, you want to be the best at. How do you balance folks who want to be really good at that, but also when they go into the battle, they have to have those internist skills and things that they haven't done for a while? How do you do that?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to recognize and operate in is we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So those highly specialized skills, they've got to stay there. They've got to be maintained. And so you talked about the direct care system. I think the beauty of the current structure that we are growing into with this merger of the Defense Health Agency and networks and the medical command for the Air Force for service equities, that merger into a single office provides that ebb and flow as we look at delivery of the benefit and those highly specialized skills that we need in our force generating platforms, like here in San Antonio with BAMC and Wilford Hall. These are force generating platforms, so you need that skill set. You've got to be able to train the future providers that are coming, right? In addition to that, we have to provide that care for our families and our service members. So that's wonderful. Where the service part comes in with the medical command is then saying the question that you posed. Well, how do I do that and then start defining those things that are more broadly applicable? We're still in the infancy of that on the provider side, on the physician and nurse side of things. Picking out which skills need to be broadly represented so that, yes, you're a urologist, I'm a cardiologist. But hey, for me, before I became a cardiologist, I was an internist, right? So dusting off that skill set, which ones are we going to need? That's what we want to head towards in the Air Force, to be able to bring those skills back to the fore. Not lose the specialized skills, but add back to the arrows in the quiver for when you are out there alone and unafraid.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you mentioned alone and unafraid. That means that the capabilities and what the medics are able to do out in an austere environment are going to be larger than we've had before. How do we prepare them for a prolonged field care scenario where we can't get them out of that point of injury, right, and they're basically there for hours, maybe even days?
Right, and so the first part of that is generating the discussion, because we haven't had to think about that. And so just simply putting that on the table, what are we going to do if transportation is not available to us? It all starts with starting the dialogue. The second piece for that, in my mind, is mission command. I need to train our medics to think independently. We operate as a team, and historically within the Air Force, we've operated as a fairly sizable team. So there was always someone you could go to. I don't know how to do this, but there's somebody else here who does. So when you talk about the mindset change, it's inoculating people with an understanding that you are going to be in smaller teams, and all those capabilities you're used to having surround you aren't going to be there. And that means individual initiative. It means strategic initiative, like we talked about. What skill sets do we really need, and when and why, right? And then it means mission command. How am I going to be empowered in a small team, much like our special operations forces do, to then go deliver that care and not feel hemmed in? Because it's going to be you and no one else. So that level of comfortableness, we build that in by changing how we train. We want sets and reps and realistic training. We don't want simulation. For those that are familiar with exercises, we're not white carding our way out of this. We need to sit down and nug it out and force ourselves to train realistically, to develop that confidence that I can engage in mission command. I can go execute this with what I know.
So when the Secretary of Defense talks to his Joint Chiefs and they talk to the surgeon generals and they say, okay, we're preparing for large-scale combat operations near peer, are we ready medically? Do we have a ready medical force that can deal with that? And if the answer is yes, how do we know?
Right. So the answer to the first question, are we ready? We're always ready. We're always ready. Now, what we're working on is not that we're ready. We have individual giants. They are able to deliver fantastic care. Where we have to refine ourselves is how to do that care in a new environment. New for us, not new in warfare. You referenced World War II earlier. New for us. So how do we do that? How do we change that? That's a discussion again. That is a constant drumbeat of it's not the way it's been. You have to think differently. So at the service level, when we go back to the chairman and we go back to combatant commanders, our job is to convince them that we have built a force structure that can in fact operate in pulsed operations in agile combat employment environments. Is that getting to what you asked? But I feel like there was more to your question.
Well, I mean, I guess, is there something that you can point to and say, these are metrics that we are following that give us the confidence that we can provide this medical support to the combat commands?
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I'll start there with, again, recognizing the wonderful merger between the Defense Health Agency and the service commands. That merger is important because the Defense Health Agency looks at KSAs, right? Key and critical skills. That is now merged with the KSAs that are important for readiness. And so from a service perspective, we've identified those things that need to happen in these small units. When we talk about earlier, well, where are you going to expand providers? What are they going to need to know that maybe they're not doing as a highly specialized provider? Those are already under development. And what we have to then do is train to that and then demonstrate that and certify it instead of sidestepping it. And so when I think about the next fight, the reassurance that as a service we give the chairman and we give combatant commanders is that we've identified those readiness skill sets. In the Air Force, it comes in the form of what we call force elements. A force element is discrete modular capability. It can be anything that's finely tuned as vascular surgery, and it can be broad as in a base operational support element. That would be focused on DMBI and returning airmen to the fight. We have those criteria. It's part of what we call our CMRP, all right, Comprehensive Medical Readiness Program. And so with my Air Force hat on, every single individual and every single military treatment facility is assessed on their attainment of those CMRP goals. And they're tiered from tier 1 all the way up to tier 4, with progressively more complicated mission sets from individual readiness up to team readiness. And we assess those on both an individual and institutional level on a regular basis. Some as frequently as every month, others once a quarter. to make sure we continue the forward momentum.
One of the things that you said that made me think a little bit was the impact a potential large-scale combat operation could have on the homeland, where all of a sudden, not going to Walter Reed or BAMC or San Diego, we're taking care of everyone within the military health system, but now we have thousands of patients that we have to have a national system. And we've heard the word joint, and so that's service connected, but it's also connected with government agencies, the VA, and the civilian healthcare system. How do we prepare for something like that we haven't seen for 60, 70 years?
That's correct. So if there is a silver lining at all in the COVID pandemic, and you got to dig deep to find a silver lining, the silver lining was it demonstrated to us that our national healthcare system is not as resilient as we thought it was. I mean, we were sending military medics into civilian institutions to help provide care. Why? Because we plan. That's what we do. And so anybody's going to be able to come in and assist on a moment's notice, it's the military. But what that showed us is we are not as resilient. We don't have that expansiveness. And then that impacts what you're talking about large-scale combat operations. The prevailing thought up until 2 to 3 years ago was that we would bring casualties back to the United States through what's called our ICMOC plan, and then we would disperse them. Once we had maximized the capacity of the direct care system, we would disperse to the VA and to civilian sectors. Well, COVID forced us to go back and rethink that entire process.
Right.
So you're right, it's a whole of nation response that we're talking about. Now, that doesn't relieve us from the obligation inside the military healthcare system to optimize and be effective. Again, that partnership is incredibly important as we look to be very effective in large places like San Antonio, and you mentioned San Diego and the NCR, but we also have to be effective in our relationship with our civilian partners. And we need the entire country engaged in that discussion so that if something does happen and we do get engaged in large-scale combat operations, as a nation we respond. No differently than we did in World War I and World War II. It is the entire country that has to come together if we are called to do that kind of thing.
One of the things that this meeting is somewhat focused on is emerging technology to help us better care for patients on the battlefield at home. Where do you see the biggest gap in technology? What do we really need to be focusing on to prepare for that next battle in the technology space?
Well, there are certainly a lot of them. I will tell you the two that are on my mind are the autonomous vehicles, so the ability to transport patients without a human being involved. When you look at small teams, you cannot suffer the loss of that manpower to be able to transport patients to rear echelon. Those medics need to stay up there and continue to do their jobs. So I think about autonomous vehicles and how we transport patients out of the forward edge and get them back to higher levels of care that don't involve stripping a unit of manpower to do that. And the second thing I think about is remote sensing. All right, how do you amplify a medic's capability by the use of remote sensing to a patient? Something as simple but as necessary as vital signs monitoring at a distance. So if you do have a single medic responsible for a large number of personnel, how can that medic have situational awareness at a distance as to what's going on with them? You may not see them, but if you can see their vital signs and see that something is perturbed, you know that person's somebody you've got to go after. So I think about those. The issue there, of course, is the electromagnetic spectrum and how is that going to be threatened? So how can you engage at sensing at a distance that is not vulnerable to being hacked so that our adversary potentially would know what's happening,
right,
and then still render a situational awareness that we could respond quickly? That's a wicked problem.
Yeah. So what is something that keeps you up at night about kind of supporting the next fight in military medicine?
I think there are many things, but the largest one is the fundamental shift in the nature of warfare and the delivery of healthcare. We are rightly proud of the fact that in the most recent conflicts, we have generated a 98% plus survival rate. Our country expects that as a result of it, and they should. We are going to do everything we can to save every single serviceman and woman. But in large-scale combat operations, in contested logistical environment, in pulsed operations, in agile combat employment with smaller teams, we also have to have the discussion about how we're going to deal with moral injury that this country has not faced.
Right.
Not just the military, the entire country. If we get involved in large-scale combat operations, there is a generation of Americans that have not, that have not seen that kind of casualty rate. And so we've got to be talking now about that moral injury. We've got to start inoculating ourselves right now that if something were to happen, we're going to do amazing. We're going to perform as we've always performed, but on a scale that will take a mental and emotional cost that our country has not seen. So how do we prepare for that so that we don't shrink in the face of it, but we rise up and lean into it? That's a whole of nation discussion.
Right. You trained as a cardiologist, and so you're a healthcare professional, but you stayed in uniform for an entire career. Yeah. What is it about military medicine that kind of helped you make that decision to stay in?
Well, now you're going to make me cry. The military is about team. And the example I always use is I was stationed in Alaska, and it was January. It was below zero. And at the time, North Korea was behaving in a way that we weren't certain we might have to go do something. So we had to prepare. That's what we do. So here we are in January. It's below zero. It's Saturday morning. And I am out setting up a medical facility in the field. And the ground is so cold that we had to use sledgehammers to pound the spikes into the ground. And I am surrounded with a couple of hundred medics who are finding a way to make that fun and to help each other and support each other as hard as it was, as cold as we were, because that's the mission that we have before us. I want to be around people like that. That's what I want to be around. So, yes, is there a siren call of money? You bet there is. Money doesn't work for me. I want to be around those people. And it doesn't matter that they're airmen in this case. Soldiers and sailors and Marines are all the same way. It's the team. It's inherent trust from day one. We all take the same oath. And I have not found a parallel to that anywhere else, so I don't want to be anywhere else. I'll stay as long as they'll let me stay.
So a segue to that question, and this will be my last question, is we have some younger folks that listen to our podcast, and they may be in high school or college, and they may be considering a career in military medicine. What specific advice would you give them to say, this is a good thing?
Oh my gosh, well, we could spend a whole afternoon on answering that one. But I'll start with this, the team and that belonging. That ability to be part of something that's bigger than yourself, and everybody recognizes that. Yes, we want individual accomplishment. Yes, I want to be an individual success. But in the military, your individual success doesn't matter unless the team succeeds. And so that bond is, again, something I haven't seen replicated anywhere else. And military medicine has afforded me opportunities to do things that I never thought I would do. I'm a clinician. I love taking care of human beings. It's sacred to take care of another human being, right? But I have been able to go places and do things that would have never happened if I had been a civilian physician. Now, have I been to some places I don't want to go back to? The answer is yes.
Wait a second, you're in the Air Force.
But yeah, right on. But there are far more in the tally of places that I have been to, missions I have engaged in, humanitarian relief, expanding myself. I have been able to deliver clinical care. I've been able to do aerospace cardiovascular research. I've been able to be a flight surgeon and fly in the very aircraft that we use to do our nation's bidding. I've done all of that. What is there not to love about that?
We've been speaking with Major General Harrell on this episode of WarDocs in combination with OpMed TV. Sir, thanks for your time. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and
right
thank you for your service.
Right on. Thank you so much.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of WarDocs, made possible by a partnership with the Defense Strategies Institute's OpMed TV. To stay connected with Team WarDocs, visit our website at wardocspodcast.com. Follow us on social media for updates and subscribe to our WarDocs YouTube channel for more engaging content. Your support helps us continue to document the experiences and contributions of military medicine professionals as we honor the legacy and preserve the history of military medicine for the next generation.